At the time of gaining independence by the 13 colonies, North America was divided into several zones of influence between the USA, the Spanish, the French, the British and even the Russians. Moreover, if the outskirts of the continent belonged to someone, then its huge central part remained free. A whole bunch of Indian tribes lived there, both nomadic and sedentary, both practicing agriculture and not. They waged a war of all against all, periodically entering into short-term alliances with both neighbors and Europeans. If we look into the future, then none of them managed to withstand the onslaught of the white man. Everyone gave in, lost land, concluded unequal treaties, and in the end, went to reservations. But before that, some managed to inflict considerable damage on the Americans, who were their most implacable enemies. Which of them achieved greater success is a difficult question. A book by Fenimore Cooper was written about Chingachgook, and a wonderful German film was made with a Yugoslav actor in the leading role. But he was the last of the Mohicans, and his heroism could not change anything. At the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, a coalition of Sioux and Algonquin tribes routed General Craster's detachment, and he himself lost his life. But soon the people of the chief's Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull were attacked by obviously superior forces. The tribes were subdued and locked up on reservations. At the Battle of the Wabash in 1791, the Shawnee in Miami, with the support of other northwestern tribes, sent 900 Americans to heaven in one day. This was the greatest of the Indian victories over the United States, in which they lost a third of their then army. But then their fragile alliance fell apart, and individual clans of redskins fought alone and died alone. The Comanche resistance lasted from 1706 to the mid-1870s. They fought with the Spanish, Mexicans, Texans, and Americans. But it was a low-intensity conflict, waged not by the government, but by individual settlers. That is, not a war, but a series of small skirmishes. The Indians remained in their place for so long only because the white man was not interested in this arid region. When the U.S. Army decisively opposed them, they were subdued within a few years. But the greatest damage was done to them by disease. The Apaches were considered mighty warriors. Their homeland of Arizona was the last of the continental states to become part of the USA, after it there were only Alaska and Hawaii. Never considered a large and significant tribe, they remained independent for 250 years. But it was like, why can't anyone catch Elusive Joe? Because no one wants him. When they were actually taken on, the Apaches were exterminated, fled to Mexico, or went to reservations. The question was settled in those same few years. So if I were pressed for an answer, I'd bet on the Florida Seminoles. The Spanish conquest and disease had wiped out most of the population of that peninsula by the 1700s. Then a few northern tribes migrated here, who later became known by a new name. The decline of the Spanish Empire allowed them to gain a foothold here, after which the Indians began raiding the estates of American planters. This led to retaliatory actions after the United States gained independence, and during the First Seminole War, a significant part of the tribe moved to Oklahoma reservations. The rest hid in the jungle and swamps, continuing the fight. During the second conflict between the Americans and this tribe, more than 30,000 soldiers and volunteers were deployed on the peninsula, twice as many as the Seminoles, including women, old people, and children. About 1,500 whites then lost their heads from Indian axes, guns and arrows, and the same number from diseases. The resistance continued until the late 1850s, when the leaders finally led their people to the swamps, which the Americans considered unsuitable for settlement. The conflict eventually died down on its own, and it was the most costly of the Indian wars, both in money and lives. The Seminoles were not expelled or signed a peace treaty with the United States, and to this day they proudly call themselves the unconquered tribe.